Welcome to the Science of Happier Work. Today we are going to talk about how to improve productivity and sales measurably using the psychology of happiness and high performance. So if you have any role that requires selling or, really broadly speaking, it can be productivity as well. I think you'll find a lot of value in this. And there's really two studies we're going to focus on, and then we'll talk through some applications from those studies. Let's start with productivity. There was a study published by Oxford, or not published by, but I should say the researchers were from Oxford University, published a couple of years ago, and they found that happy employees were 13% more productive. Now, this is important to understand because there's different ways of conceptualizing or measuring happiness. In this case, they were looking at day-to-day variation in happiness and levels of positive emotion. And the way that they surveyed this was simple. They just sent people an email at the beginning of the day, throughout the day, with just kind of a rating of like, rate your happiness from 1 to 5 with like a frowny face, a neutral face, and a big smiley face. And so they gave people that survey, and then they tracked or mapped how people responded to that survey against their productivity. So things like how closely they adhered to their schedule, the amount of calls they made, and then the amount of conversions they got on their calls, because they were in like a sales, telemarketing type thing. They did this study. So what we see is in a sales context, and this would apply, of course, to like a customer service context as well, and most business contexts, but we don't want to get too carried away. What we find is that when people are in a better mood, they are happier. Now, the crazy part about this study is they even looked at like the weather, and they found that like on days when it was gloomy and crappy and rainy out, people were a little less happy and a little less productive. So as a manager and as a leader of a business, you can't necessarily control the weather, we suppose, but there are certain things you can do. And I apologize if you can hear it. Sounds like they're doing some mowing outside my house right now, which is great timing because we're live. But anyway, that's the first study. The second study, I think, is perhaps more powerful. So this study was on optimism in the context of happiness. So if you think about happiness, there's many different ways to be happy, and there's different dimensions of it. If you're happy about the past, we oftentimes think of that as like contentment or satisfaction, right? If you're happy, like right here, right now, that can be any variety of like positive emotions, joy and excitement, etc. And if you're happy about the future, you tend to view the future positively. We often talk about that in terms of optimism. So in the 1980s, MetLife Insurance was hiring I think the number was 5,000 salespeople per year. 5,000 salespeople per year. And guess what their training budget was? It wasn't zero. It was the other direction. $75 million. They spent $75 million a year on training. And that was in the 80s. I mean, what would that be now? That'd be hundreds of millions. And they had 50% attrition. 50% of their reps quit within 1 year, and about 80% of them quit within 2 years. So it wasn't working. And they turned to Dr. Martin Seligman, who's kind of a pioneer in positive psychology, which is kind of the psychology of happiness and well-being and flourishing. And he said, I think optimism would play a key role in this. That's something that he had done a lot of research on in his lab. And he said, okay, we're going to design an optimism assessment so that when you're hiring people, not only are you going to test their sales aptitude, but you're going to test their optimism. And the first year, those who passed the optimism test compared to those who didn't pass the optimism test, but they just passed the aptitude test, right? Those who passed the optimism test outsold by about 8%. At the end of year 2, they had outsold the more pessimistic peers by about 31%. That's incredible. So again, understand you have two groups of people, both of them pass the baseline sales aptitude test. One of those groups passes the optimism test, and after 2 years, they outsell by 31%. Now, gets even crazier. He convinced MetLife to hire this group of people that he called like super optimists. These are like super happy people that did really, really, really well on the optimism assessment, but they actually failed the aptitude assessment. You can maybe imagine these people, right? That they're like super happy, positive, but I have no idea what they're doing. And of course, I think in some contexts and some industries and some roles, this would maybe be a bad idea, but he convinced them to give it a shot and hire them. After 2 years, these super optimists outsold by 57%. 57%. That is incredible. So, what we have to understand here is, particularly if we are thinking in a sales performance context, whether you're an individual contributor, small business, mid-sized business, or a massive company the size of MetLife with thousands of employees, that happiness, the psychology of happiness, is serious business. We see day-to-day variation in happiness and mood, accounting for about a 13% increase in sales productivity. And then we see, broadly speaking, happiness levels with respect to optimism and how people view the world, accounting for maybe up to a 50-some% difference over the period of years. So if you're not assessing for, training around, and intentionally managing for happiness and positive emotional context, you are drastically selling yourself short in the world of sales. And I should add that I'm not like a sales technician and trainer. This is not my background, right? My expertise is in applying science-based tools for happiness to improve performance. And that's how I came to this research. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you how to structure your calls. And if you say, oh, if you use this type of close, it'll do way better, or oh, you got it all wrong, you need to do this with your branding. No, it's not my expertise. But what the psychology is saying is that if you have people who are happier day to day and have more positive outlook towards the future, they are going to outsell. So what can we do about some of this? Well, I will just give you a few ideas here in a very short time. So let's start first with maybe that Oxford study that looked at kind of day-to-day variation in mood. So the first thing you do is you can measure the climate of your team or department or organization as a whole. Now, climate is actually something that comes more from the military side of things. Command climate. In military leadership, this has become a central topic in today's Department of Defense. And climate is kind of like the culture, but it's a little different. It's more of the felt experience and perceptions of the work environment in an organization. And it's a little bit more local and a little bit more current than the culture. So if you think about like the Army infantry, they have a certain historical culture and norms and way of doing things, but a specific unit during a specific month may have a slightly different climate. Okay. So in that 13% study from Oxford, what we're thinking more about there is climate. So you can, again, assess this as an organization. So two ways to do it. One, you can use various climate assessments that assess the drivers of mood. You could literally just ask employees, what's the morale been like for the last month? Or, over the last few weeks, have you enjoyed your work experience? Or, how interested and committed to your work are you? Right? All these different ways of assessing kind of employee experience, which drives the climate. One of my favorites is, because it's so simple, is called ENPS. That means Employee Net Promoter Score. And this is just asking employees, hey, how likely are you to recommend working at this place to a friend or family or someone else? Like, how likely are you to recommend it? So it's basically saying, how much of a promoter are you of our workplace? And generally, this is a good proxy for the climate and cultural health of an organization, because if people say, oh, I love, everyone should work here, like I would tell everyone 10 out of 10, you need to work here. Obviously, that means you're doing a lot of things right. So, and conversely, if you get a really low measure back, it means the climate is probably not in a very sustainable place. So you can measure climate, right? This day-to-day variation in mood across your teams, across departments, etc. That is the first part, is measure it, because what gets measured gets managed. The second then is trying to create positive emotional contexts. Now, what I mean by that is that, especially when you think about the role of your managers, is they are intentionally trying to create positive interactions and generally positive environments. So, that's different from saying everyone's going to walk in and be like, "Hey, this is the best day ever. Let's sing and play music." No, that will probably get old very quickly. But there are subtle things you can do in terms of structuring your meetings, even with, having a thoughtful icebreaker, or you surprise your employees with a little gift, or you ask people about their favorite movie, right? Which has actually been shown to create kind of a release of dopamine and positive energy, right? So strategically trying to create positive emotional context, and conversely, avoiding or managing the negatives. Now, that does not mean you can never have a disagreement or you never have conflict. But if there's ever these kind of toxic or intensely negative and overly critical interactions, right, those should be done when they absolutely must be done in private, so that you aren't spreading that emotional energy throughout the office or the team. But rarely, if at all, are they even necessary. Sure, if someone does something ethically wrong, or critically wrong, that was a lapse in judgment, we may need to sternly correct that. But very rarely does it work to just go in there and angry and upset or pessimistic, and it just brings everyone down. And so the idea here is intentionally creating positive emotional context and managing to avoid the negative ones. And you can even think about that in terms of, so I went to a talk a couple years ago by the CEO who turned around Best Buy. And I loved his opinion on this, because someone asked him, well, what if there's someone who kind of creates negative emotional dynamics, and maybe they're even a little toxic, but they get really good results and they're a high performer? And he said, obviously, you give them a chance to get on side and tell them what the expectations are and the vision and get them on board. And if they continue to not be on board, but they perform really well, he says, you reward their good performance. You promote them to customer. So you promote them to customer. So I would advise the same thing here. In terms of your management strategy, you're trying to create positive emotional contexts. And if there are certain people who are pockets of toxic leadership, that should be managed just as if it were a performance issue. So you have that. And a third idea here is going to be just emotionally intelligent leadership. So the first thing is trying to create processes and systems and activities that support people being in a better mood and more positive. This one is specifically about how your management engages with those frontline people, and it's being sure to do it in an emotionally intelligent way. So emotional intelligence is really the ability to recognize your own emotional states, the emotional states of others, and manage or regulate them effectively. So you're not kind of this overly pessimistic, always seeing it worse than it is. You're not this, angry, frustrated outburst type. Okay, generally, you're in a resourceful emotional state, and probably even a slightly positive emotional state as you engage with people, and you learn how to manage conflict in that way and support others to be in a good place emotionally. So, you have leaders who understand the role of emotional intelligence and have some skills to manage their own emotions effectively and the dynamics of their team. And they're intentionally trying to create positive context through meetings, through activities, through giving people recognition when they do things well, doing little surprises, and dare I say it, maybe even having a little bit of fun. Okay, you can actually do that, right? I know that's you don't say the F word at work, but you can actually have fun at work. So by doing all of that, and you're measuring and intentionally assessing the climate of the organization, you can get greater productivity and sales performance by influencing it to be supportive of happiness, which, as we see, goes with productivity and sales. Now, let's talk about that UPenn study that was more about the optimism piece. Two things to consider there. One would be, again, assessment and measurement. So you can, during the hiring process, build in an optimism assessment that tries to favor those candidates who score really well there, knowing that they're going to be more likely to be retained and they're going to be more effective later on. But do not overlook the role of training, because as it turns out, optimism, being more positive about the future, can actually be learned as well. the way this works is you train on what's called the 3 Ps of perception. And this means that when you are not optimistic, you're a pessimist, you tend to see bad things as permanent, personal, and pervasive. Those are the 3 Ps. So, personal, it's all about you. Permanent, it's going to last forever. And pervasive, it's not just one thing, it's like your whole life. So, imagine you don't get a sale, okay? Right? Maybe it's hard for you to imagine that because you're so good, but hey, just imagine you don't get a sale. And I'm interpreting that with the 3 Ps: pervasive, permanent, and personal. So I don't close the sale. And so I think, wow, it doesn't matter that they didn't really need the product or that they were already using someone else. I'm a failure. I'm no good at that. I really suck. I really screwed this up. So you just made something that it's not about not taking responsibility. It's good to take responsibility, but there are certainly other factors involved. Instead of focusing on your performance, you're more taking it on like a personal level. Okay. And then you say, well, I'm never going to be able to get a sale. I'm never going to be able to hit my goals. Again, you took a one-time failure and just made it permanent. And then pervasive, again, instead of saying, well, I kind of screwed up the sale, it's saying, oh, well, I'm just a lousy salesperson and I'm no good. I'm a bad father too. And I'm a lousy thinker. I can't do anything right. So again, there was that one little column where you failed, which was sales performance. And now you're saying, I'm stupid in every area of life. I'm not a good father. I'm not a good person. So you just, right, take the bad things, you're making them personal, permanent, and all pervasive. Now, the flip side of all those things is where you get an optimist, because a bad thing happens to an optimist and they say, yeah, well, I maybe could have done better on that, but there was also a bunch of reasons why it wasn't the right time for that prospect. And on top of that, I know I'm going to get the next one back. And, maybe on that one sale, I didn't do a great job, but I know that I'm really good in all these other areas of my life and that sales is just one more thing for me to grow into. Whatever. You see, I know that maybe sounds a little bit like overly positive thinking, woo woo stuff, but it's really about shifting intentionally your own perceptions. And by the way, that is what therapy and psychotherapy are about. Cognitive behavioral therapy is about changing your cognition and your behavior through psychological therapy. So it's the same thing. You just do it on yourself. Now, flip this around for the good things. Optimists lean into the 3 Ps. So something good happens, you do get the sale and you make it permanent. You say, I'm going to get every sale. I'm going to crush all my goals. I'm amazing. You make it personal. You say, that was all me, baby. That was me. And then you make it pervasive and you say, not only am I a kick-ass salesman, like I'm a great husband, I'm a great dad, I'm a great thinker, I'm a great leader, I'm a great whatever. You lean into the 3 Ps. And so again, those training around those 3 Ps, that is how you can actually learn to shape your own perception so that it can be more effective in terms of your sales performance and your sales career. So you can assess and you can train for it. So I hope this video is very practical if you were in a sales role or have anything to do with sales and productivity, in fact. But specifically, these 2 studies which suggest that you should be measuring and assessing both the day-to-day kind of happiness in terms of the climate and emotional dynamics of your organization. You may want to assess and measure the optimism level of the people you work with. And then you need to train on creating positive emotional context through emotionally intelligent leadership and ensure people are empowered to train themselves to be more optimistic and positive about the future. And if you do those things, you're going to sell a whole lot more. So thank you for watching this video. We are on here every month to share some practical tools from the science of happiness to help you be at your best in your business and your life. And so we'll have some topics like this that are more organizational. Sometimes it's more personal, but you'll get some tools to take back to help you flourish. So thank you for watching. This has been Jackson Kirchis with Happiness Means Business, and I'll see you next time.